In the Arizona Territory of 1874, kindness was a dangerous currency. You didn't give it away freely, and you certainly didn't spend it on the enemy. But on a night when the heavens opened up and turned the world into a grave of mud and stone, a widow named Alara Vance made a choice that would bring the entire U.S. cavalry to her doorstep. She pulled a dying girl from the earth, unaware that she wasn't just saving a life. She was inciting a war. And when she woke up the next morning, a ghost was waiting for her. A pure white stallion, standing guard at her gate. A gift or a warning? This is the true, untold story of the mudslide at Black Canyon. The history books will tell you that the monsoon of August 1874 was simply a weather event. They will list the rainfall in inches and the cattle lost in head counts. But if you look at the private journals of Captain Josiah Sterling or the land deeds signed by the corrupt prospector Cormac Bull O'Bannon, you'll see the truth. That storm didn't just wash away soil. It washed away the lies covering a conspiracy that went all the way to the governor's office in Prescott. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of day where the heat pressed down on the Verde Valley like a physical weight. Alara Vance was 40 years old, with hands that were rougher than sandpaper, and a face that had forgotten how to smile since her husband Thomas died in a mine collapse 3 years prior. She lived on the edge of the accepted territory, right where the civilized maps ended and the Apache lands began. It was a dangerous place to be a woman alone, but Alara was too stubborn to leave and too poor to move. Skies turning the color of a bruised plum. Her ranch hand, an old freedman named Silas, muttered, looking north. Silas was the only one who stuck by her, mostly because nobody else would hire a man with a bad leg and a darker complexion in this part of the territory. "Let it rain," Alara said, wiping sweat from her neck. "The creek's been dry since May. We need it." But they didn't need this. By sundown, the rain wasn't falling. It was driving horizontally, like bullets. The sound was deafening, a constant roar that drowned out thought. Alara and Silas spent the first hour reinforcing the barn doors, the wind screaming like a banshee. Then came the sound that every frontier settler fears more than gunfire. It started as a low vibration in the soles of their boots. Then, a cracking sound, like the spine of the earth snapping. "Mudslide!" Silas roared, grabbing Alara's arm. "Get to the ridge!" They barely made it out of the cabin. The mountain behind them, destabilized by O'Bannon's illegal hydraulic mining operations upstream, a fact Alara would only learn later, gave way. A wall of sludge, trees and boulders tore through the valley. It missed Alara's cabin by a mere 50 yards, but it swallowed the old creek bed whole. They huddled under a rock overhang on the high ridge, shivering as the world destroyed itself below them. When dawn broke, the rain stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The silence was heavy. The valley floor was gone, replaced by a scarred landscape of brown sludge. Alara picked her way down the slope, her boots sinking into the muck. She was checking for lost livestock when she saw it. A hand. It was small, brown, and barely visible against the dark mud, sticking out of a tangle of uprooted mesquite roots near the bank of what used to be the creek. Most folks in the territory would have walked away. The tensions with the Apache were at a boiling point. General Crook was sweeping the area, and finding an Apache on your land was often cited as cause for an investigation or a raid. But Alara Vance didn't see politics. She saw a child. "Silas, bring the shovel," she screamed. She threw herself into the mud, clawing with her bare hands. The earth was heavy, suctioning around the small body. It took them 20 minutes of frantic digging to free her. She was a girl, no older than 16. Her buckskin dress was shredded, her black hair plastered to her face with clay. She wasn't breathing. "She's gone, Ilara," Silas said softly, leaning on his shovel. "Let the earth have her." "No." Ilara turned the girl over and pressed hard on her back, forcing the muddy water out of her lungs. She did it again and again. She worked until her own arms burned, fueled by a grief she hadn't processed for her own husband. Cough. A ragged, wet gasp tore from the girl's throat. She retched, spewing black water, and curled into a ball, shivering violently. Ilara wrapped her own heavy coat around the girl. As she did, she noticed a necklace revealed by the torn dress. It wasn't simple beadwork. It was a heavy medallion of beaten silver, inlaid with turquoise in a pattern of a striking hawk. Silas saw it and stepped back, his eyes wide. "Miss Ilara, that ain't just a wanderer. That mark, that's the Skyhawk totem. She belongs to Chief Cochise's bloodline, or maybe Victorio's. I don't care if she belongs to the Queen of England," Ilara snapped, lifting the girl into her arms. "She's freezing. We're taking her inside." For 3 days, the girl drifted in and out of a fever. Ilara used her own bed, sleeping in the chair by the door with a Winchester rifle across her lap. The danger wasn't just the girl's health, it was the neighbors. Specifically, Cormac Bull O'Bannon. O'Bannon owned the mining claim up the ridge. He was a massive man, red-faced and perpetually smelling of cheap whiskey and gunpowder. He had been trying to buy Ilara out for 2 years, and his offers were getting lower and more threatening by the month. On the second day, O'Bannon rode up to the porch. Ilara stepped out, closing the door firmly behind her. "Rough night, Mrs. Vance," O'Bannon sneered, looking at the mud damage near her barn. He was flanked by 2 hired guns, men with eyes like sharks. "Shame about the creek. Heard it washed out the bridge, too." "We're fine, Mr. O'Bannon," Ilara said, her hand resting near the pistol in her apron pocket. "Did you need something?" "Just checking for debris," O'Bannon said, his eyes trying to peer through the window. "My boys saw some Apache tracks up near the ridge before the slide. With the mud moving everything around, you never know what kind of trash washes up on a decent woman's doorstep." "Only trash I see is standing on my porch," Ilara said coldly. O'Bannon's face darkened to a deep purple. "Careful, widow. The territory is a dangerous place. Accidents happen." He rode off, but Ilara knew he would be back. Inside, the girl had woken up. She was sitting up in the bed, staring at Ilara with dark, unreadable eyes. She didn't speak English, or if she did, she chose not to show it. She accepted the broth Ilara made, her movements stiff but proud. There was a dignity to her that made the small cabin feel like a throne room. When Ilara changed the girl's bandages, she saw the scars, old ones, bullet grazes. This child had seen war. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. The girl stood up, her strength returning with unnatural speed. She walked to the door and looked toward the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. She turned to Ilara. She reached into a small pouch at her waist, the only thing she had kept with her, and pulled out a single, heavy silver coin. It wasn't U.S. currency. It was Spanish, old and worn smooth. She placed it on the table, then touched her heart, and then Ilara's. "Gokchich," the girl whispered. Then she opened the door and vanished into the pre-dawn mist. She moved so silently that Silas, who was chopping wood around the back, never even saw her leave. "She's gone," Ilara told Silas over coffee an hour later. She felt a strange pang of loneliness. Didn't even tell me her name. Best she's gone, Silas muttered, though he looked relieved. O'Bannon's men are circling. If they found her here, they'd hang us both for treason. Ilara looked at the silver coin on the table. She had a feeling the transaction wasn't finished. She was right. The next morning, Ilara woke to a strange sound. It wasn't the rooster. It was a sharp, commanding whinny, followed by the heavy stamp of hooves. She threw on her robe and opened the front door. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Standing at her gate was a horse, but not just a horse. It was a Mustang Stallion, 16 hands high, with a coat as white as driven snow. It was unbridled, wild, rippling with muscle. Its mane was braided with eagle feathers and strips of red cloth. Tied to the fence post next to the stallion was a bundle of furs, fox, beaver, and bear, worth more than Ilara's farm had made in 5 years. "Lord have mercy," Silas whispered, coming up behind her. "Is it a stray?" Ilara asked, though she knew the answer. "That ain't a stray, Miss Ilara," Silas said, his voice trembling. "That's a ghost horse. The Apache call them Diin. Sacred. Only the war chiefs ride them. And look." Silas pointed to the horse's flank. Painted in red clay was a symbol, a handprint. "It's protection," Silas said. "They're telling the world that this house is under their watch." Ilara walked toward the gate. The massive stallion didn't flinch. He lowered his head and blew warm air against her palm. He wasn't wild to her. He was waiting for her. But as Ilara ran her hand over the stallion's neck, she saw dust rising in the distance. A lot of dust. It was O'Bannon returning. And this time, he wasn't alone. He had a man in a blue uniform with him. Captain Sterling from the fort. The gift was magnificent, but in the eyes of the U.S. cavalry, possession of an Apache war chief's horse was a capital offense. It was proof of collaboration with the enemy. The girl had paid her debt, but she had accidentally handed Ilara a death sentence. Captain Josiah Sterling was a man carved from granite and regret. He had served in the Civil War under Sherman and had come west to forget the smell of burning cities. He was a stickler for the law, but in the Arizona Territory, the law was often written by men like Cormac O'Bannon. Sterling pulled his bay mare to a halt 10 feet from Ilara's gate. The dust settled around his polished boots. Behind him, 4 privates from Fort Verde sat uneasily in their saddles, their hands hovering near their carbines. But it was O'Bannon who spoke first, his voice booming with a triumphant, oily resonance. "Well, Captain," O'Bannon sneered, gesturing with a gloved hand toward the magnificent white stallion tied to the post. "I told you the widow was holding out, but I didn't think she was running a stable for the enemy." Ilara stepped off the porch, the mud sucking at her boots. She kept her hands visible, palms open. "Captain Sterling, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Sterling ignored her pleasantry. His eyes were locked on the white stallion. The horse stared back, its nostrils flaring, emitting a low rumble that vibrated in the air. Sterling knew horses. He knew that animal wasn't broken to a saddle in any corral in the Union. That was a creature of the high plains, trained by voice and spirit. "Mrs. Vance," Sterling said, his voice grave, "do you know whose animal this is?" "It arrived this morning," Ilara said, steady. "I assume it's a stray." "A stray?" O'Bannon let out a bark of harsh laughter. He dismounted, walking boldly toward the gate. "That animal is wearing a bridle of woven horsehair and silver. That's Apache tack. And look at the paint." O'Bannon pointed a thick finger at the red handprint on the stallion's flank. That's a war mark, Sterling confirmed, finally looking at Alara. Mrs. Vance, under General Order Number 11, trading with hostiles is a federal offense. Harboring their assets is treason. We've had reports of a raiding party moving through this canyon 3 days ago. They hit a supply wagon near Camp Verde, killed 2 men. I haven't traded anything, Alara lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. Technically, she hadn't traded. She had saved a life. And I certainly didn't kill anyone. Then explain the furs, O'Bannon cut in, walking past the captain to inspect the bundle tied to the fence. He ripped it open. Fox, beaver, and look here. He pulled out a knife, not a skinner, but a combat knife with a bone handle. This belonged to your late husband, widow. Or did you take it as payment for hiding a fugitive? Alara's blood ran cold. She hadn't seen the knife in the bundle. I found a girl in the mudslide, Alara said, deciding the partial truth was her only shield. She was drowning. I pulled her out. I fed her. She left. This must be how they pay for a night's rest. A girl? Sterling raised an eyebrow. An Apache girl? She was a child, Captain, not a soldier. Apache women fight just as hard as the men, O'Bannon spat. He turned to Sterling. Captain, this is clear evidence. She's an accomplice. This ranch is a safe house for renegades. I've been telling you for months that the Vance claim was obstructing legitimate mining interests. Now we know why she won't sell. She's sitting on a smuggling route. O'Bannon's logic was twisted, but effective. He walked up to Alara, invading her personal space. He smelled of stale tobacco and greed. Here is how it goes, Alara, O'Bannon whispered, low enough that the soldiers couldn't hear. You sign the deed over to me right now. I tell the captain I made a mistake, that this horse is actually one I bought at auction and it got loose. You pack your bags and leave the territory alive. Or you hang. Alara looked at him. She saw the glint of the hydraulic mining operation in his eyes, the operation that had caused the mudslide in the first place. You caused the slide, didn't you? She realized aloud. You blasted the ridge illegally. That's why the mud came down. You almost killed me. O'Bannon's face hardened. He stepped back and shouted, She's resisting, Captain. Arrest her. Mrs. Vance, you are to come with us to Fort Verde for questioning, Sterling commanded, signaling his men. And we are confiscating the animal as contraband. Don't touch that horse, Silas's voice rang out. The old man had come around the side of the house holding an axe. He wasn't threatening them, just holding it. But the soldiers leveled their rifles instantly. Stand down, boy, O'Bannon yelled. That's a spirit horse, Silas warned, his eyes wide with a fear that went beyond the law. You touch that rope, and you bring down thunder. The Apache didn't give that horse to her. They loaned it to mark her. Superstitious nonsense, O'Bannon grunted. I've broken 1,000 horses. I'll break this one too. O'Bannon, eager to prove his dominance and claim the prize, unlatched the gate and strode toward the white stallion. That was his first mistake. The moment O'Bannon's hand touched the braided rope halter, the stallion exploded. It wasn't a panic reaction. It was a calculated strike. The horse reared up, a towering wall of white muscle, and struck out with its front hooves. One hoof caught O'Bannon square in the chest. The sound of breaking ribs was audible even over the wind. O'Bannon flew backward, landing in the mud with a wet thud, gasping for air, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Shoot it! O'Bannon wheezed, clutching his chest. Kill the beast! One of O'Bannon's hired guns, a twitchy man named Pike, drew his revolver. Thwip. There was no gunshot, just a wet, solid sound. Pike's hat flew off his head, pinned to the wooden siding of the cabin by a black feathered arrow. The arrow was still vibrating. It had passed 2 inches above his scalp. "Take cover!" Captain Stallion roared, diving behind the water trough. The soldiers scrambled, dragging their horses behind the barn. Ilara stood frozen on the porch. She looked up toward the ridge, the same ridge where she had found the girl. The skyline had changed. Along the crest of the canyon, silhouetted against the morning sun, were riders. Not just a few. Dozens. They sat motionless on their ponies, rifles resting on their thighs. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. "My God," Stallion whispered, peering over the trough. "That's not a raiding party. That's a war band." O'Bannon was groaning in the mud, too injured to move. The white stallion stood over him, not trampling him, but guarding him like a prisoner. The horse looked up at the ridge and let out a piercing whinny. A single rider separated from the group on the hill. He rode down the slope with a terrifying grace. He wore a blue soldier's coat with the sleeves ripped off, and his face was painted with a single white stripe across the eyes. "That's Victorio," Silas whispered from the doorway, pulling Ilara inside. "Get in, Miss Ilara." "No," Ilara said, her feet rooted to the planks. "If I run, they burn the house." The rider stopped 50 yards from the fence. He raised a Winchester rifle above his head. He didn't speak English, but the message was clear. "This is a perimeter." "Captain!" O'Bannon screamed from the ground, blood bubbling at his lips. "Do your duty. Kill them." Stallion looked at the ridge, then at his 4 terrified privates, and finally at Ilara. He realized the tactical situation instantly. They were in a bowl. The high ground was taken. If a single soldier fired a shot, they would be slaughtered in seconds. "Hold fire," Stallion ordered. "Nobody shoots unless I say so." He stood up slowly, holstering his pistol to show he wasn't a threat. "I am Captain Josiah Stallion of the United States Cavalry," he shouted toward the ridge. "We wish to parley." The Apache leader didn't respond to Stallion. Instead, he looked directly at Ilara. He pointed to the white stallion, then pointed to Ilara, and finally brought his hand to his chest in a sign of respect. Then he turned his gaze to O'Bannon, writhing in the mud. The respect vanished. The rider made a cutting motion across his throat. "They want him," Silas said. "They want the man who caused the slide." "How do they know?" Ilara asked. "They watch, Miss Ilara. They've been watching the whole time. They saw O'Bannon blasting the mountain. They know the mud took the girl. And they know you pulled her out." Ilara realized, with a jolt of clarity, that she was the only neutral ground in a war zone. The white horse was a marker, a do-not-touch sign, placed upon her and her property. O'Bannon had violated that sign. "Captain Stallion," Ilara called out, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You need to come inside. Now, leave Mr. O'Bannon." "I can't leave a civilian to die, Mrs. Vance," Stallion barked, though he looked like he wanted to. "He's not a civilian right now," Ilara said. "He's the sacrifice." Suddenly, a second arrow struck the ground, inches from O'Bannon's head. Then a third, pinning his coat sleeve to the mud. They were toying with him. Stallion cursed. "Grab him, dragging him to the porch. Cover fire, but aim high. Do not hit the riders." The soldiers unleashed a volley of shots into the air, creating a wall of smoke. 2 privates sprinted out, grabbed O'Bannon by his collar and belt, and dragged him screaming onto the porch, just as a hail of bullets kicked up the mud where he had been lying. They slammed the heavy oak door of the cabin and barred it. The cabin was suddenly very crowded. Alara, Silas, Captain Sterling, 4 soldiers, and a moaning, broken O'Bannon. Outside, the silence returned. It was heavier than before. "They have us besieged," Sterling said, peering through a crack in the shutter. "They won't rush us. They'll wait for dark. Then they'll burn us out." "They won't burn the house," Alara said, walking to the kitchen to pump water for a rag. "Not while the horse is tied to the porch." O'Bannon coughed, spitting blood onto Alara's clean floor. You witch. You planned this. You called them down on us." Alara knelt beside him, pressing the wet rag to his forehead not out of kindness, but out of duty. "I didn't call them, Cormac, but it seems justice has found you all the same." "Justice?" O'Bannon laughed weakly. "I'm the richest man in the valley. I own the judge. I own the—" "You don't own the land," Silas said from the corner, holding his axe. "And right now, your judge is about 1,000 yards away." Sterling turned to Alara. "Mrs. Vance, if we get out of this, I'm going to need the truth. Who was that girl?" "I told you," Alara said, looking Sterling in the eye. "I don't know her name, but she gave me a silver coin." Alara reached into her pocket and pulled out the Spanish dollar. She tossed it to Sterling. He caught it, examined the markings, and his face went pale. He looked at the date, 1798. Then he looked at the heavy scratches on the face of the king, a specific, ritualistic marking. "This isn't currency," Sterling whispered. "This is a summons. It's a token used by the Apache elders to request a council. The girl, she wasn't just a chief's daughter. She was a peace envoy." Sterling looked at O'Bannon with sudden, intense fury. "O'Bannon, did you know there was a peace delegation moving through the canyon?" O'Bannon's eyes shifted away. I might have heard rumors. Bad for business, peace is. Keeps the army prices down." "You son of a bitch," Sterling hissed. "You blasted the ridge to kill them. You tried to bury the peace treaty in a mudslide so you could keep selling beef to the army at wartime prices." The room went silent. The conspiracy was out. O'Bannon hadn't just been mining. He had been orchestrating a continuation of the war for profit. "Well," O'Bannon smirked, blood on his teeth. "Prove it, assuming we live through the night." At that moment, the white stallion on the porch let out a scream, not of anger, but of alarm. Heavy smoke began to drift under the door. "I thought you said they wouldn't burn us," Sterling shouted. "They aren't burning the house," Silas said, sniffing the air. "That ain't wood smoke, that's sage, and burning pitch." "They're smoking us out," Alara said. "No," Silas corrected her, moving to the window. "They're masking the smell. Something is coming, something they don't want the horses to smell." Outside, the white stallion was rearing, pulling at its rope, eyes rolling in terror. From the darkness of the tree line, a new sound emerged, a low, rhythmic growl. Not a wolf, not a bear. "Mountain lion," Alara breathed. "They brought a cat?" one of the soldiers asked, terrified. "No," Sterling said, gripping his revolver. "They're driving it toward us. It's an execution. They're going to let nature kill the man who tried to use nature to kill them." The cabin smelled of sweat, blood, and impending death. Outside, the cougar screamed, a sound like a woman shrieking in agony. It was close, right at the porch steps. The Apache were using torches and noise to corral the starving predator, pushing it toward the only living things it could smell. The people inside the cabin and the white stallion tied to the post. "He's going to kill the horse," Alara yelled, grabbing the Winchester from the table. Stay back, Captain Sterling ordered, leveling his revolver at the door. If you open that door, we're all dead. The cat will come in, or the Apache will shoot us. If that horse dies, Ilara snapped, chambering around, our protection dies with it. The moment that stallion is gone, they burn this cabin to ash. Let the beast eat, O'Bannon rasped from the floor. He dragged himself into a sitting position, his eyes manic with pain and malice. Shoot the horse, Captain. If the horse is dead, the Indians have no reason to hold back. They'll attack, and you'll have to kill them. It forces the army's hand. You sick devil, Silas muttered. Before Sterling could respond, the heavy timber of the front door shook. Thud. The lion had thrown its weight against the wood. Then a crash of glass. The lion didn't come through the door. It came through the side window, the one O'Bannon had been peering out of earlier. It was a blur of tawny muscle and claws. The animal was panicked, driven to madness by the fire and noise outside. It landed on the dinner table, scattering plates, hissing, its ears flattened. The room erupted. Fire! Sterling shouted. The soldiers unleashed a chaotic volley of gunfire. The room filled with blinding smoke. Bullets splintered the wood walls, missing the cat but blowing out the lantern. Darkness swallowed them, lit only by the muzzle flashes. The lion, untouched by the panicked shots, leaped, not at the soldiers, but at the scent of fresh blood. It landed on O'Bannon. O'Bannon's scream was a sound that Ilara would never forget. It was the sound of a man meeting his sins in the flesh. The great cat swiped, its claws tearing through O'Bannon's coat and into the shoulder that wasn't already broken. Get it off me! Help! O'Bannon shrieked. Sterling hesitated. In the dark, with the soldiers scrambling, he couldn't get a clean shot without hitting O'Bannon. Ilara didn't hesitate, but she didn't aim at the lion on O'Bannon. She saw the front door had swung open in the chaos. Through the smoke, she saw the white stallion outside, rearing up, its rope pulled taut, its eyes wide with terror. A second cougar, the mate, was crouching on the porch railing, ready to pounce on the horse's neck. Ilara ran. Ilara, no! Silas screamed. Ilara sprinted out the open door, onto the porch. She raised the Winchester. The second lion launched itself at the white stallion. Ilara fired. Bang! She worked the lever action. Clack, clack, bang. The first shot hit the mountain lion in the midsection. The second caught it in the neck, midair. The beast crumpled, sliding off the stallion's flank, leaving a streak of red on the white fur, but missing the jugular. The stallion kicked out, striking the dead cat, then stood shivering, covered in sweat and blood. Inside the cabin, a final gunshot rang out. Silence followed. Ilara stood on the porch, smoke curling from her rifle barrel. The rain had started again, washing the blood from the porch planks. Slowly, the shapes on the ridge began to move. They weren't shooting. They were descending. Captain Sterling stepped out onto the porch, looking pale. He holstered his smoking revolver. O'Bannon? Ilara asked, not looking back. He's alive, Sterling said grimly. I had to shoot the cat off him. He's mauled bad, but he'll live to stand trial, if we don't all die in the next 5 minutes. The Apache war band had reached the yard. There were 50 of them. In the center rode the leader, the man with the white stripe across his face, and riding next to him, on a pony painted with yellow dots, was the girl. She looked different. The mud was gone. She wore a dress of soft deerskin, and her hair was braided with silver. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like royalty. The circle of riders tightened around the cabin. The silence was absolute, save for the heavy breathing of the horses and the soft weeping of O'Bannon from inside the house. Captain Sterling stepped forward, his hands raised. "I am Captain Josiah Sterling. We claim self-defense against the animal. We have treated your emissary with honor." The war chief didn't look at Sterling. He looked at Alara. He looked at the dead mountain lion on the porch, then at the white stallion, which was now nuzzling Alara's shoulder, seeking comfort. The chief said something in Apache, his voice like grinding stones. The girl slid off her pony. She walked past the armed warriors, past the nervous soldiers, and up the steps to the porch. She stood toe-to-toe with Alara. She was small, but her presence was immense. "You shoot straight," the girl said. Alara blinked. The English was accented but perfect. "You speak our tongue." "I learned it at the reservation school," the girl said, her eyes hard, "before men like O'Bannon burned it down to clear the land for grazing." She turned to Captain Sterling. "I am Nante, granddaughter of Cochise. I was coming to Fort Verde to bring the treaty tokens, to stop the war." Sterling's jaw dropped. "The peace delegation. General Crook has been waiting for you for a week. We thought you had abandoned the talks." "We did not abandon," Nante said, her voice rising so the soldiers could hear. "We were ambushed, in the canyon, not by soldiers, by miners." She pointed a finger at the open door where O'Bannon lay bleeding. "That man," Nante declared. "He used the thundersticks, dynamite, to bring the mountain down on us. He killed my 2 guards. He buried the peace offerings in the mud. He thought he killed me." "He claims it was an accident," Sterling said, though his tone suggested he no longer believed it. "A mining mishap. Is this an accident?" Nante reached into her sash and pulled out a leather-bound book. It was wet and stained with mud, but legible. Sterling took it. This is a ledger." "It was in his saddlebag," Nante said. "I stole it before the mud took him. Look at the last page." Sterling opened the book. Silas brought a lantern close. Sterling read aloud, his voice shaking with rage. "August 12th. Detonation set for North Ridge. Target, Apache delegation. Objective, disruption of treaty. War creates demand for beef. Contract secured with Fort Grant at $0.15 per pound. Estimated profit, $50,000. It was there in black and white. O'Bannon wasn't just a corrupt miner. He was a war profiteer who had attempted to assassinate a diplomatic envoy to keep the army mobilizing, driving up the price of the cattle he secretly owned through shell companies. "Treason," Sterling whispered. "High treason." "He tried to murder the peace," Nante said solemnly, "and he tried to murder the woman who saved me." Nante turned to Alara. She took Alara's hand, the hand that had dug her out of the mud, the hand that had shot the lion. She raised it high. The war chief on the horse gave a sharp cry. The 50 warriors raised their rifles and let out a deafening shout. It wasn't a war cry. It was a salute. "The white stallion chooses only the brave," Nante said to Alara. "He is yours. He will not let another ride him. He is Diin, the spirit guardian. As long as he stands on this land, the Apache will not ride against you. You are blood sister to the canyon." Sterling looked at his men. "Get O'Bannon up. Bind his hands and feet. If he bleeds out, patch him up. I want him alive to face the hangman in Prescott." 2 soldiers dragged the moaning O'Bannon out. When he saw the Apache, he screamed, begging the captain not to let them take him. "They aren't taking you, Cormac," Sterling said, cold as ice. "I am, and you'll wish they had." As the soldiers loaded O'Bannon onto a horse, the war chief rode up to Alara. He leaned down and handed her something. It was a feather, a golden eagle feather, tipped in red, the highest honor a warrior could bestow. "My father says thank you," Nante translated, "for the life of his daughter, and for the justice of the mountain." The Apache turned their horses and began to ride back toward the ridge, fading into the morning mist like ghosts. Nante paused one last time. "The mud washes away, Alara Vance," she said softly, "but stone remains. You are stone." She mounted her pony and followed her people. Alara stood on the porch, the white stallion breathing warm air against her neck, the eagle feather in her hand. Silas sat down heavily on the bench and wiped his forehead. "Well," Silas said, chuckling nervously, "I guess we ain't moving to the city after all." "No, Silas," Alara said, watching the sunrise hit the peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. "We're staying right here." But the story wasn't quite over, because when you possess a spirit horse and a federal prisoner, the road to the final conclusion is never a straight line. The road to Prescott was not paved with glory. It was paved with frozen rut marks and the biting wind of a high desert January. It had been 3 months since the siege at Black Canyon. Alara Vance, accompanied by Silas and Captain Josiah Sterling, rode into the territorial capital of Arizona under a sky the color of slate. They were not greeted as heroes, not yet. To the muddy, bustling population of Prescott, they were merely the witnesses in the most controversial trial the territory had ever seen. Cormac "Bull" O'Bannon had not died from his wounds. The army surgeons at Fort Verde had saved his life, though they could not save his arm. He sat in the prisoner wagon ahead of them, a brooding figure nursing a shattered shoulder and a hatred that burned hotter than the wood stoves in the saloons along Whiskey Row. The trial of the territory of Arizona versus Cormac O'Bannon began on January 14, 1875, at the Yavapai County Courthouse. It was the kind of event that emptied the mines and silenced the gambling halls. The courtroom was a suffocating box of pine and body heat, packed with cattle barons, prospectors, journalists from as far away as San Francisco, and curious soldiers. Presiding over the case was Judge Horace B. Guthrie, a man known as the Hanging Judge of the Highlands, whose gavel sounded like a gunshot. The prosecution was led by Marcus Thorne, a young, ambitious attorney who smelled blood. But O'Bannon, despite his chains, had retained Thaddeus Gantry, the most expensive and ruthless defense lawyer west of the Mississippi. As Alara took her seat on the hard wooden bench behind the prosecutor, she felt the eyes of the room on her. They whispered. They called her the Indian lover. They called her the Witch of the Verde. In 1875, saving an Apache, even a child, was not seen as an act of mercy by everyone. It was seen by many as a betrayal of her race. The defense's attack. The first 2 days of the trial were a bloodbath for the prosecution. Gantry, the defense attorney, was a master of theater. He paced the floor in a fine silk suit, painting O'Bannon not as a villain, but as a martyr of industry. "Look at this man," Gantry bellowed, pointing to O'Bannon, whose empty sleeve was pinned to his chest. "A pioneer, a job creator, a man who has poured his sweat and blood into the soil of this territory. And for what? To be mauled by a beast? To be dragged in chains by a captain who is clearly incompetent?" Gantry turned his shark-like gaze on Captain Sterling, who sat in the witness box. Captain Sterling, Gantry purred. Is it not true that your promotion was denied last year? Is it not true that you have been vocal about your sympathies toward the hostile tribes? I believe in the law, sir, Sterling answered stiffly, his hands gripping the rail. And murder is against the law. Murder? Gantry laughed. You have no body. You have no witnesses to this alleged bombing of the ridge other than a savage girl who has vanished back into the hills. A girl, I might add, whose people are currently at war with the United States. The gallery murmured in agreement. O'Bannon smirked from the defense table. He looked pale, gaunt, but confident. He knew how the West worked. Money didn't just talk, it screamed. The widow's testimony. On the third day, Marcus Thorne called Alara Vance. When she walked to the stand, the room went silent. She didn't look like the witch they had whispered about. She looked tired. Her hands, resting on the Bible to take the oath, were rough, scarred from barbed wire and work. She wore her mourning dress, the black faded to a dusty gray. Mrs. Vance, Thorne asked gently, tell the jury what you found in the mud. Alara spoke quietly at first, forcing the jury to lean in. She spoke of the storm, the sound of the earth cracking, the hand sticking out of the sludge. I didn't see an Apache, Alara said, her voice gaining strength. I saw a child who couldn't breathe. I pulled her out because if I hadn't, I would have been no better than the mud itself. And Mr. O'Bannon? Thorne asked. What did he do? He came to my house, Alara said, looking directly at O'Bannon. He threatened me. He told me that accidents happen in the territory. He offered to buy my silence. Gantry shot up from his chair. Objection. Hearsay. The ramblings of a lonely, frightened woman. Sustained, Judge Guthrie grunted. Stick to the facts, Mrs. Vance. The fact, Alara said, overriding the judge, is that he didn't just cause a slide. He tried to bury the piece. Gantry stormed the stand on cross-examination. He loomed over her, trying to break her. Mrs. Vance, isn't it true that you are destitute? That your ranch is failing? It's a hard year, Alara admitted. Isn't it true that you harbor resentment toward successful men like Mr. O'Bannon? That you conspired with Captain Sterling to frame a rival to save your own failing farm? No, Alara said. Then where is the proof? Gantry shouted, slamming his hand on the rail. Where is the proof that this was anything other than a tragedy of weather? You claim he blew up the ridge to kill a peace delegation. That is a fantastic story, Mrs. Vance. A fairy tale. Where is your proof? Alara looked at Captain Sterling. He nodded. She reached into the pocket of her dress. The proof, Alara said, is in the saddlebag of the horse you tried to have killed. The ledger and the coin. Captain Sterling stood up and placed the leather-bound book on the prosecutor's table. It was water-stained, caked in dried mud, but it was intact. Exhibit A, Alara declared. Cormac O'Bannon's private ledger, stolen by Nante, the granddaughter of Cochise, moments before the slide hit. The mood in the room shifted instantly. O'Bannon's smirk vanished. He whispered frantically to his lawyer, his face turning the color of ash. Prosecutor Thorne picked up the book. He didn't shout. He read calmly, his voice carrying to the back of the room. August 12th. Purchase of dynamite from the Union Supply Comer, $200. August 14th. Note to foreman, wait for the signal. The Apache delegation moves through the lower pass at noon. August 15th. Entry. The job is done. The treaty is dead. Beef prices at Fort Grant have risen to 18 cents a pound. Expected yield, $40,000. The courtroom erupted. This wasn't hearsay. This was a confession written in O'Bannon's own hand. He hadn't just mined illegally. He had orchestrated a domestic terror attack to prolong a war for profit. Lies, O'Bannon screamed, standing up and knocking his chair over. She forged it. That book was lost. It's a forgery. And this? Ilara asked, pulling the second object from her pocket. She held up the heavy Spanish silver dollar, the one Nante had given her. She placed it on the railing. Next to it, she placed the golden eagle feather given to her by the war chief. This coin, Ilara said, her voice trembling with emotion, marks the bearer as a friend of the Apache nation. It is a diplomatic seal, and this feather is a war honor. Do you think, Mr. Gantry, that a lonely, frightened woman could forge the sacred tokens of the Chiricahua Apache? She turned to the jury. Cormac O'Bannon tried to sell a war, she told them. He thought the mud would hide his sin, but the mud gave it back. The verdict. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. When they returned, the foreman, a weathered cattleman named Eli Harris, refused to look at O'Bannon. We find the defendant, Cormac O'Bannon, guilty on all counts, Harris announced. Guilty of murder in the second degree. Guilty of incitement to insurrection. Guilty of high treason against the people of the territory. Judge Guthrie didn't waste time. He put on his black cap. Cormac O'Bannon, the judge intoned, you are a stain on this frontier. You traded blood for gold. You are sentenced to be hanged by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul, for Arizona will not. O'Bannon was dragged from the courtroom screaming. He cursed Ilara. He cursed the captain. But mostly, he cursed the ghosts that he claimed were watching him from the gallery shadows. The gallows. The execution took place 3 weeks later, on a frigid February morning. The town of Prescott turned out in the thousands. It was a grim affair. There were no cheers, only a heavy, somber silence. Ilara stood at the back of the crowd, Silas by her side. She didn't want to watch, but she felt she owed it to the girl, Nante. When O'Bannon stood on the trapdoor, he looked out at the crowd. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. He looked past the sheriff, past the priest, and his eyes locked onto Ilara. He didn't speak. He just nodded, a small, resigned twitch of his head. He knew. The mountain had won. The lever was pulled. The rope snapped tight. The war profiteer was gone. The legacy of the white stallion. Ilara Vance returned to the Verde Valley a different woman. The isolation that had once defined her life was gone, replaced by a legend that grew with every passing year. She didn't sell the ranch. In fact, she expanded it. With O'Bannon gone, the illegal mining stopped, and the creek eventually returned to its natural course, clear and sweet. But it was the horse that truly cemented the story in the history of the West. The white stallion, whom Ilara simply called the Baron, a private joke, naming him after the nobility she had never met, became the guardian of the valley. He was a creature of two worlds. By day, he would allow Ilara to brush his coat and even ride him, though never with a saddle, only a blanket. By night, he would stand at the gate, his ears swiveling toward the dark ridges. In 1878, the Apache Wars flared up again. Victorio and Geronimo broke from the reservations, and the territory burned. Ranch houses were razed, cattle were slaughtered, and the army was helpless to stop the lightning raids. One night in late spring, a raiding party of 20 warriors descended on the Black Canyon. They burned the Miller Place 3 miles east. They cut the fences at the Harper Ranch. As they approached Alara's cabin, Silas blew out the lantern and loaded his shotgun. Alara sat on the porch, unarmed, watching the shadows move in the moonlight. The riders stopped at the property line. Standing in the middle of the road, glowing like a phantom in the moonlight, was the Baron. The great white horse didn't whinny. He didn't run. He simply stood there, blocking the path, his red handprint, faded but still visible, shining on his flank. The lead raider rode forward. He lowered his rifle. He looked at the horse, then at the woman, sitting calmly on the porch. He raised his hand in a salute, turned his pony around, and the war party vanished into the night. Not a single fence post on the Vance ranch was ever touched. The end of the trail. Silas passed away in the winter of 1889. He died in his sleep, a free man who had found a home and a family. Alara buried him on the highest point of the ridge, facing east, so he would always see the sunrise first. The Baron lived to be 25 years old, an ancient age for a wild horse. When he finally died, Alara didn't drag his body away. She and 2 hired hands spent 3 days digging a grave beneath the massive cottonwood tree by the creek. She buried him with the silver Spanish coin braided into his mane. Alara Vance lived to see the turn of the century. She saw the railroad come through. She saw the territory prepare for statehood. She never remarried. When asked why, she would always smile and say, "I've had enough drama for one life. I'm just happy with the quiet." She died on a Tuesday in 1904, the same day of the week the mudslide had happened 30 years prior. They found her in her chair on the porch, a faded eagle feather clutched in her hand. The modern echo today. If you drive north from Phoenix on the I-17 toward Flagstaff, you pass through the Black Canyon City area. It's a landscape of harsh beauty, scrub brush, and volcanic rock. There is a small, unpaved road that winds back into the foothills, marked only by a rusted sign that says Vance Track. If you hike back there, you'll find the stone foundation of a cabin. The wood is long gone, reclaimed by the earth. But locals swear that the legend isn't dead. Campers in the area often report a strange phenomenon during the heavy monsoon storms of August. They say that when the thunder rolls and the lightning flashes, for a split second, you can see a shape on the ridge. A massive white horse, standing guard, watching over the canyon where a widow once saved a ghost, and a ghost saved her back. The mud washes away history, but kindness is written in stone, and that is the incredible true life saga of Alara Vance, the woman who defeated a tycoon and befriended a war chief, all because she refused to let a child die in the mud. It's a powerful reminder that in the Wild West, the law wasn't always written in books. Sometimes it was written in loyalty, bravery, and the spirit of a white stallion. O'Bannon thought his money made him untouchable, but he forgot the oldest rule of the frontier. Nature judges us all. What would you have done? Would you have risked your life to save a stranger from the enemy side, knowing the army would brand you a traitor? Or would you have walked away? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this journey into the untold history of the West, please destroy that like button like Alara took down the mountain lion. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story of frontier justice and survival. We have a saga coming up next week about a saloon girl who became a mayor, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and keep riding.